The United Nations Security Council is the world's most powerful decision-making body, responsible for global security and diplomacy. However, only 5 countries, the United States, China, Russia, the United Kingdom, and France, hold veto power, allowing them to block any decision or resolution. Meanwhile, Africa, a continent with 1.4 billion people and 54 independent nations, has neither a permanent seat nor veto power. Is this an unfair system? Should Africa also have veto power? Many African leaders have raised serious objections to this imbalance. In 2023, the African Union was granted permanent membership in the G20, yet it still lacks representation in the United Nations Security Council, UNSC. South African President Cyril Ramaphosa, Kenyan President William Ruto, and Egyptian leaders have repeatedly demanded that Africa be given a permanent seat and veto power. This demand has gained momentum because decisions affecting African nations, such as sanctions, military interventions, and political resolutions, are made by external powers like the West, China, and Russia, while Africa itself has no control over its own fate. But if Africa were to get veto power, which country should receive it? This is a highly debated question. South Africa is a strong contender due to its developed economy and its membership in BRICS. Nigeria is another major candidate, as it has Africa's largest economy and one of the continent's most powerful militaries. Egypt is also strategically significant, representing both the Arab world and Africa. However, some experts argue that instead of giving veto power to a single country, it should be granted to the African Union, ensuring representation for the entire continent and preventing any single nation from monopolizing the power. But why hasn't this demand been met yet? The answer lies in global politics and power struggles. The United States, China, Russia, and Europe are wary of a major geopolitical shift if Africa gains veto power. The West wants to maintain its influence over Africa, while Russia and China also seek to protect their own strategic interests. As a result, demands for UNSC reform have been ignored for decades. The United States and Europe fear that an African seat would weaken their control over the Security Council, while Russia and China want to ensure that if Africa gets a veto, it aligns with their interests. In this power game, Africa remains a spectator rather than a decision-maker. But if Africa were to gain veto power, how would it change global politics? One of the biggest impacts would be on African conflicts. Today, if a civil war breaks out in an African country, or if a foreign power wants to intervene militarily, Africa has no power to stop or influence the decision. Conflicts in Libya, Sudan, Somalia, and Mali have been handled by external powers, not by Africa itself. With veto power, Africa could make its own decisions about its own continent. Another major impact would be on economic sanctions. Many African countries are currently under UN-imposed sanctions, which hinder their economic growth. If Africa had veto power, it could block such sanctions or make independent decisions on which countries to support or oppose. A third impact would be on global trade and investments. Today, Africa's vast natural resources are controlled by Western and Asian powers. But with permanent representation at the UNSC, Africa could reshape its trade policies, define its global partnerships, and negotiate better economic deals. But the big question remains: are Western nations, China and Russia, willing to give Africa such power? As of now, UN reforms remain stuck in discussions. Countries like India, Brazil, and Japan are also demanding permanent seats at the Security Council. Yet no new permanent members have been added. Africa's case is strong, but global power politics continue to work against it. So, will Africa ever get veto power? Can African nations apply enough diplomatic pressure to force global leaders to act? Or will Africa continue to be left out of the world's most powerful decision-making body? What do you think? Should Africa be granted veto power at the UN? Share your opinion in the comments.